Welcome to The Deal with Danny Brown. I'm your host, Danny Brown, where we break down the most successful real estate agents and real estate moguls in the world, find out their habits, their routines, their wisdom, their advice, their mindset, all that good stuff. We've been doing it for 6 seasons, 7 seasons, maybe 8 seasons now. So please find us on any podcast format and on YouTube, subscribe, leave us a comment. This week's guest, incredibly impressive. It's Wendy Forsythe from Compass. She's the president of the Western United States, which includes Hawaii, California, and other markets. She started her career as an agent in Nova Scotia, a very small town with some frigid cold winters. And now she's all the way in Southern California, Newport Beach. So she's come a long way, but an incredibly inspiring story. She became a top agent first and then head of her own brokerage, and then was acquired. Then she got in the leadership side. And now she's running West Coast for Compass with some of the best agents in the world working underneath her, and you know the story. You can find her anytime, Wendy Forsythe at Compass, and her Instagram is at Brand Wendy, but it's Wendy Forsythe, spelled Forsythe. School is in session. You better grind if you don't want to be left behind. Enjoy it. Hey Wendy, welcome to The Deal. Good to see you.
Hey, Danny, good to be here.
Well, great to get together on Zoom and want to get into the market and the world and what we're dealing with. Wendy is the president of Compass for the Western United States, California, Hawaii, etc. That means you have a 30,000 square foot view of a lot of big luxury markets on the West Coast. You're in leadership and operations, etc. But before we dive into what's happening today, here we are in July of the summer, let's get to your story first, because you're a Canadian, right?
I am a Canadian. Yes, a Canadian that found her way to California.
A surfing Canadian. So walk us.
I don't surf.
You don't surf. We'll work on that. We'll have to work on that. Don't you live in Newport now?
I work out of our Newport Beach office. So yeah, live here in OC, but just never took up the surfing in my time in California. It's on my to-do list though.
You know what? I'm gonna have to get some boards for that office if there isn't any. And next time down there, we're paddling out.
That's right. Well, we do have lots of surfboards in many of our Compass California offices. So anybody wants to drop by and visit, we'll find them aboard for sure.
All right, so let's jump in. Let's talk to me a little bit about where you grew up and where you went to school and how you even got into this godforsaken real estate business.
Well, I wouldn't say godforsaken. I consider myself extremely blessed to have had a long career in real estate. I was originally born and raised in Nova Scotia, Canada. So on the East Coast, on the Atlantic Ocean, so pretty much about as opposite of California as we can get. Started my real estate career there. And as I think many, career real estate people will share, I got into the business at the influence of my family, specifically my dad, who is a new home developer still to this day. But I grew up around real estate, hanging out with dad, was checking in on job sites over the weekend and getting the lowdown on, the houses that he was building. So, loved the business. He's so funny. He's been one of my greatest mentors, but decided, I would go to college, to business school, and went to college in my local hometown. And was going to be a CPA. So a nice practical, career choice. I would, go into accounting, got into my second year of taking my 4-year degree. And they had all of the really fun accounting courses, taxation, managerial accounting. I mean, it was bananas. And yeah, auditing and just all this stuff. They called it your core year in that particular program. So we were wrapping up, it was coming up to summer break. And I was like, Dad, I don't want to be a CPA. I don't want to be an accountant. And he was like, okay, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, I don't know. I want to be a business person. And I had a marketing elective that year, one of my electives, and a very cute marketing professor who, just convinced me that I should probably take a lot more marketing courses, and that, really would be fun. So my dad said, well, look, if you want to be a business person and you want to go into marketing, you need to learn how to sell. Because no matter what you decide to do, you're going to have to sell. And by the way, I just opened up a subdivision development and have 2 spec houses that need to be sold. So why don't you go get your real estate license, and you can sit open houses all summer in my spec houses. And if you sell one of them, you're going to make more money than you would at some part-time job working retail or something like that. So that's how my real estate career started. So I got my license.
I need to pause. What town is this in Nova Scotia? Because this is so foreign. You're in Newport in California.
It's a long ways. It's a long ways.
Talk to me about Nova Scotia and the winters and building houses in Nova Scotia. What is that like when it snows? But what's the town called where you grew up?
So this was Coldbrook, Nova Scotia.
Okay.
So the area, the region is called the Annapolis Valley. A wonderful part of the world, famous for apple orchards and the highest tides in the Bay of Fundy in the entire world. Those are claims to fame.
And brutal winters, I assume.
Brutal winters, yeah, typical Canadian winter, as you would expect. From the building perspective, you just hoped to get the foundations in the ground, because in that part of the world, they still build a lot of basements.
Okay.
So you're, digging the foundations in, unlike here where we do so much on cement slabs. But yeah, you got the foundations in, so you could get the buildings, wall tight and roof tight, and then do the inside work during the blustery winter days.
So that's it. You got to time it right or you're done. I mean, you got to be working inside because that's real winter. I mean, it's below zero type stuff. This isn't Santa Monica and Laguna, Yeah,
it isn't like, a rainstorm and the world stops.
It's 50 degrees and it's a little wet today. All right. So you cut your teeth in the family business, so to speak. You're selling in Nova Scotia. The minute you did that, was it like, okay, light bulb went off, this is what I want to do, and I want to do sales and be an agent full time? Is that?
I mean, I went back to school that fall. So, worked selling real estate that summer, went back to school in the fall, finished my degree, but still kept selling real estate. And that first full 12 months, did just over 100 transactions.
Wow.
This is in the early 90s. So now I'm dating myself. But it was in the early 90s. And, I just was one of those, I've always been an avid learner. And I was just one of those people that, when the other agents around the office, kind of told me to do something, I did it and didn't ask a lot of questions. So I'll give you an example. I'm really dating myself, my goodness. So this was back when the MLS system was a 3-ring binder. So on Thursdays in my local market, all the new listings would get delivered via a courier to all the real estate offices. And you'd get your little stack of paper with your new listings. Yeah, it wasn't a big, there's a little stack of paper. And I would spend Thursday nights entering the new listings into my 3-ring binder that was color coded and indexed and price and all of these things.
You're organized.
I would, totally that type A personality.
Type A. You're type A, Wendy. Shocker.
But in the office, there was this big bookshelf of other 3-ring binders that were labeled expired. And for the first couple months in the summer, I didn't really know what that meant. But then somebody told me oh, those are all the listings that didn't sell. You can call those people and see if they want to, relist. And I was like, well, heck, like, let me start calling people.
Right. What? Sure.
So I just would sit at open houses and call expireds. And Danny, you have to envision this. It was the early 90s. I had leftover 80s hair.
Ha!
So,
Big
you know,
air.
big hair. For those of you that are watching this, you can.
White Cad shoes. What were they wearing?
Well, I was very stylish in my small town. But like I look back on it now, I'm like, how did these people ever list their houses with me? But if I could get in the door and I could like they could see eye to eye, I knew the market, I knew the inventory, I knew how to, position the property and now I would say merchandise the property. I wasn't quite that sophisticated then, but a lot of how people make decisions is off of our energy, right? And they would entrust me with the sale of their home. So those were my early days.
For context, give me an average typical sale in the early 90s in Nova Scotia. What did the house look like? How big was it? What price was it?
I mean, this is just so far from the world we live in now, Danny. But I'll, I'll I'll tell you about my first sale. My very, very first sale was a $4,000 mobile home. And in that part of the world, a mobile home, like it had wheels. So it was like a 16 by 60 or something, you know,
Like a trailer.
and it was a trailer, yeah. And it had to be moved from where it was located, somewhere else because it was on like a leased piece of land.
You got to find a place to put it. All right.
But you want to know the fun part of that sale is I double ended it
Woo!
buy side, and I got a $1,000 flat fee commission.
That's huge. If it's 4,000, that's 25%.
I know. So the average sale price at that time was like probably between 100 and 200. It's about 150. That would get you like a 1,200 square foot single family home on maybe a half acre. Today I'm happy to report it's much, much higher in that market, but it was a different world and a different place back then.
So, good question. If you buy a nice family home now, is it in the millions dollar range? And that, yeah. So nothing is $5,000 anymore.
No, not even a trailer, Danny.
Yeah. Damn it. It's gonna go flip trailers in Annapolis Valley. Let's go. All right, so let's talk through your progression now, your career arc. I know at some point you started your own brokerage. You were still very young. This is, so here you are. Talk me through the different steps and what led you from being an agent to being your own broker to moving over to management leadership side.
Yeah. So life was going really well as an agent. Yeah, I was young. I was making really good money. The brokerage that I was working for approached me, and they had multiple small offices in and around the market area, and they needed a manager for one of their offices. So typical to our business, especially back then, because this was before teams and the current environment that we know. If you were a good salesperson, the next step was you became an office manager. So I got tapped and offered that opportunity. And my dad again had a big influence, still is to this day, big business and personal mentor for me. But he gave me some great advice. He said, look, if you're going to go into management, which I think you should, because you should learn how to manage people, much like his, like, you need to learn how to sell advice. He was always thinking that next step, right? Good mentor does. He said, you're going to make less money than you are just selling because your, time is going to be divided. But you should negotiate with the owners of this brokerage that you have the opportunity to buy the business from them. And this was a satellite office of their main office. So that's what we did. And that's how I got into owning my own brokerage. So It was a fascinating time. I don't know if I'd ever do it again, but I'd never trade it for the world. Like I remember, you just, when you're in your 20s, like you just don't know any different, right? But to paint the picture, I was, by this time, like mid 20s, female in a small town where, the brokerages in town were predominantly, owned by middle-aged men. Like wasn't, yeah, I wasn't recruiting the like top producer from Remax in my town, right? They weren't coming to work for, right? So I had to find a way to build the business. And for me, that was by attracting new agents into real estate. So I was able to develop like a pre-licensing training program, take them through licensing, get them licensed, and then I had to like teach them how to be productive, so that we could all, pay the bills and eat. So that's how I grew my brokerage. And so that was that next phase.
Yeah, so that's interesting because it just shows that you found your niche, even though the chips, everything was stacked against you. It was an old boys club. You were a young girl in your mid 20s. It was, not the prototype of that time. You figured out what is my wedge, what is my niche, and you figured out, let me find new agents, let me develop them, let me spend that time and be better at that than the big old shops that were out there. So that's really smart. And obviously you had some sage wisdom. It sounds like you had a dad that not only was in the business as a builder, which really helps your nuts and bolts knowledge, he gave you great advice to do, learn sales. Everyone has to learn sales and marketing, and learn managing people. And you already went to school for accounting, and so all these things together make for a very impressive business skill set. But you clearly did the work and were a grinder and figured out expireds, right? Everyone's probably said there's the book of expireds, but you were the only person to call everybody. No one else wanted to do the work.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's very much about doing the work, right? We all know that.
Yeah, you got to execute on the work. It's not reinventing the wheel in residential real estate. We know what to do. You have to actually execute better and do it. All right, so now you have a successful brokerage. You're still in Canada. What was your transition? And I don't know if it was a one step or multiple, but take me through how you ended up in California.
Yeah. So it's kind of multiple steps. So I was running my brokerage. And there's always like a pivot moment, right? Like an event that makes you kind of evaluate things. And the top team of my brokerage, a husband and wife, and this is before we called them teams, but husband and wife, I had hired them brand new, like taking them through my licensing program that I described. They had they'd become close friends. They, really like just propelled in the market. Walked into my office on like a January 3rd, like kind of the first day back after the holidays, and told me they were leaving and going to another brokerage. And, any of us that are in the brokerage business, right? Like we know that that's like a dagger to the heart. And, I asked them why, and they were, brutally honest with me. And their feedback was, we don't know if you're all in. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And they were like, well, you're going off to these conferences and you're speaking at events and you seem really distracted. And what had happened was, as I had, grown my own sales and then started growing the office, I had started getting opportunities because I was part of a franchise organization. So, the franchises always have their big conferences. So I was a little bit of like an anomaly, right? Like let's ask her to come speak on a panel. Let's ask her to come to the leadership event. And of course, I was soaking all of that up.
You were leaning in and going for it. Yeah.
Yeah, but in the course of doing that, wasn't present in my office, wasn't all in pouring into the agents like I had done. So that was a real wake up call for me of like, what do I really want to do next? And with some soul searching and as kind of the universe would have it, I had about that same time, a local independent in the market had approached me about acquiring me and wanting to grow their business. So I did end up selling the brokerage to them, merged our two companies together. And then that opened up, a door for me to move into the next chapter. And I mentioned I was part of a franchise. So the franchise company that I was with, of course, had to approve the sale, of my brokerage. And their immediate question was, "What are you doing now?" And they subsequently offered me a role at their corporate head office in Toronto, Ontario. So that was the big move from my hometown, where I was raised, school, started my career, to Toronto. Worked for that company. That was a company called Royal LePage, which is still to this day one of the dominant brokerage companies in the Canadian market. So worked for them for a number of years, learned a lot about moving from, the real estate entrepreneur into, a different type of leadership role in the industry. And then subsequently was recruited here to the US by Realogy. And Realogy, which of course now is Anywhere, but this was back when they were Realogy. In 2007, I joined them. And they had just acquired the rights to the Better Homes and Gardens brand from the publishing company. And we're getting ready to relaunch that brand as one of their portfolio brands into the market. So I was employee number 2 at Better Homes and Gardens, and made the move from Toronto to New Jersey.
Okay, so cross the border.
Cross the border. So that was the jump. And that was an interesting time because that was the fall of 2007.
Ah,
I was a Canadian kid, jumping into northern New Jersey culture. So I stuck out like a sore thumb with my, smiley face and pleasant.
forget about it.
And saying sorry all the time, and like they were like, "Oh, you're not from here." But then we actually launched the Better Homes and Gardens brand in the summer of 2008, and of course the market crashed that fall.
Lehman's crash, fall.
Yeah. So it was a really interesting time in my career and in the market. But we subsequently pushed through, built that brand, and then about 5-6 years later, I was offered an opportunity to come run a brokerage here in California. And you mentioned the Annapolis Valley, Nova Scotia, and the winters.
Yeah.
So for a kid from that part of the world, when you think of working in the US as an adult, you think of working in Southern California. So that's how I made my way to California.
So California has some pull and some juice. If you grew up in Nova Scotia winters, you're like, that sounds pretty good.
That sounds good. When I first moved here to California, I remember one night talking with my dad, and I had been here maybe 6 months. And my dad was like, "Oh, how's the weather?" And I was like, "Oh, Dad, like it's good." And he's like, "Well, we had the first snowfall here, and you miss the snow, right? Like, don't you miss the fall and the changing of the leaves? And it's so beautiful." And I must have been a little tired that night because I remember kind of snapping back at him, and I was like, "Dad, I promise you, if I never live through another snowstorm in my life, I will live a rich and fulfilled life here in California."
Well, it's unlikely that you're going to have one here at Newport. All right, so let's now bring us to today. You have a leadership and a management role overseeing a big part of Compass's Western United States. Clearly, your background is so dynamic and impressive, from sales and management and operations and startup mode to large mode and everything in between. You've had a lot of incredible experiences. So now here we are, 2023. You're at Compass. We're the biggest brokerage in the United States. In a lot of the prime big markets, we're the number one market share. You're the president of some very key important markets. Why don't you talk to us about some of the markets you're overseeing in the Western United States, And let's get into sort of the nuts and bolts. It's been a tough time. Transactions have been down. Interest rates are at 7%. Let's give us the high perspective, looking over your region of what's been going on and what it's looking like on the ground and in the trenches.
Yeah, I would say more what it feels like, right? And you're in the trenches every day, so you're living this. It's been a tough year, right? Like we anticipated that coming into 2023. We started to feel it at the middle of 2022. We knew sort of change was afoot in the market, and I think it's fascinating when you look back of call it like the last 5-year cycle, right? Like pre-COVID, market was very strong. We were all enjoying, the fruits of that market. It was a different time. We go into COVID and we had, a bit of a hiccup of like, oh my goodness, what is this going to mean? And miraculously, we figured out, hey, we're still going to sell lots of real estate, lots of, demand, had even busier times. And then sort of middle of 2022, like it just stopped for, many people in the industry. So it's been a cautious 2023. As you said, Compass enjoys the, number one market share position in, most of our California, Hawaii, markets, if not all of them, all the major markets. So we have the best of the best that work here, like yourself. So, that is tremendously beneficial in navigating a changing market. Because you have that database, you have that pipeline, you understand how to work the deals, you understand really how to grind was a word you used earlier. And I mean, I think that's what agents are doing, right now. And I think that it is a time in the market to lean in and to really keep your foot on the gas. It's not a time to lean out. And we're seeing the agents that focus on relationship, focus on serving their clients, focus on educating their clients, are continuing to do business. We have agents that are up. Like we have agents, the call before jumping on here with you is with one of our agents whose business is up over last year. And I talk to people every day that tell me that. So there's great opportunity in a changing market.
And we'll get into that. So I think that's a huge mindset piece of advice, that there are people that their business are up, and there are opportunities if you step on the gas. And it's a battle. I mean, I know mental mindset for me, it's a battle when you're grinding and running into a wall in a challenging market, to keep stepping on the gas, keep leaning in and connecting with your friends and family and clients, and letting them know what's going on and being there for them. Talk to me about transactions volume. Obviously there's many markets, but if you were going to do a blanket statement for California, Hawaii, Nevada, what percentage volume sale? What are we in terms of units sales? What are we down a big chunk? It certainly seems that way in my market in LA, but I'm curious if you take a bigger view. Is it?
Yeah, we're seeing, so speaking in a generality, like we're
Generality in the last 6 months versus the first 6 months of last year, which was screaming still. We still had a strong market last year, so it's not such a realistic comparison, but just, even over the last 3 or 4 years, the first 6 months of the year versus this first 6 months of the year.
Yeah, we're seeing transaction volume down 30 to 35%. Some markets it's higher, and then price bands, like in your market, right? The higher price points, like we're seeing up to 40, 42% down in transaction volume. That sweet spot across the state of California is still staying between that 2 to 5 million range, right? Like that's where we're seeing the majority of activity. When we get up into the, ultra luxury, like the 10 million plus, particularly in your market, like I pulled some stats that So year to date, that 40 million plus, in the Beverly Hills market, like there were 8 transactions done this year compared to 15 last year. So, various price points are reacting differently.
Yeah, what I've noticed, and you would have a bigger view, but every price band is different, and sometimes we're seeing street to street within the same neighborhood things are different. There's no real patterns. There's not a lot of predictability. But what I'm seeing in the trenches, and when something is really blue chip and desirable in a given neighborhood, at all price points, buyers' demand is there and they're jumping on it. But it's very rare to find that house. Everyone says there's no inventory, and they're right. There's very little options, especially of that perfect home that everyone wants. But when that home comes up, they're getting activity and they're trading still at record prices or near record prices. So it's a very confusing market to articulate to people that aren't in it every day. That's what I've found most challenging.
Yeah, I mean, we still see lots of multiple offer situations. I think the way you described that blue chip property is absolutely, correct. And it is a confusing market. I mean, it's confusing for us as practitioners. Imagine you're the homeowner or the buyer and you're trying to like figure that out, and you have so much noise of the media to try to then, add on to making a great decision for yourself and your family. And I think that's why for, us as practitioners, our value is just so critical to, understand the market and educate our clients. And, when one of the things that I think we really discovered coming out of COVID was that the COVID environment made us so transactional, right? We did so many deals like this, right? Where we didn't meet in person. We e-signatured things. It was, fast, get in, make the offer. And what we found in talking to our agents coming out of COVID is when they looked at their business in sort of 2022, they found fewer repeat and referral transactions as source of business, which we know is like the vast majority of where, our business comes from. So in working with some of our agents on that and trying to figure out, well, why was it? Well, when you looked back at your sales over, 2020, 2021, you didn't meet those people. You didn't like have coffee. You didn't have dinner. You weren't sitting in the car driving from house to house. You weren't like 2 hours at the inspection. Like you were a transaction.
Yeah, we couldn't sit in the car and drive around for touring for 2 or 3 hours. It was follow me, follow me.
You didn't build a relationship. So I think coming into 2023, that's been one of the things that we've really been leaning into across Compass. And you'll hear us, talk about that, COVID stole our culture, right? Like it stole that in person with our clients, with us, with our agents. And we've really been focused on like, we need to rebuild relationships and make sure we're focusing on being productive means being connected in real life. And that is, a huge part of what I think a lot of people need to kind of think about as they're navigating their way through this market.
That is such that resonates, that point, because you're right. We were also with mass and disconnected and moving quick. So it was a very unique dynamic. We were so busy, yet we weren't interacting. And this is an interaction relationship business. And if you take that playbook and try to apply it to 2023, it doesn't work at all. It's the opposite. So you think we need to get back to face, having lunches, dinners, breakfast, calling people, talking them through and spending time with each other and connecting again, versus racing to try to get a transaction done because there's such a frenzy in the market.
Yeah, exactly. So, for your listeners, like if you're looking to make sure that pipeline is full, like go back to those clients, those transactions that you had closed in 2020, 2021. I'd even go back to 19. What is the relationship with those folks? Like re-engage with them. If you're a newer agent that maybe didn't have that many transactions, like it's time to really pour into your sphere of influence, right? And really start working that sphere of influence. One of our top teams in Studio City, just spent 5 hours with his team door knocking. Right. They just went out to a neighborhood and they parked like I used to do this, like when I was selling with my office, like they just parked and they said, you take that street and you take that street and I'll take this street, go. And then they met up and, like that's the type of stuff that like we have to do.
Back to basics.
Back to basics. That's the cliche.
I love it. I love it. All right, and what is your crystal ball? How long do you think this is going to take to get interest rates back down to 5% or so? Are we in this for 18 months, 2 years, 1 year? Of course, nobody has a clue. But what does your crystal ball tell you?
I wish I had the crystal ball in that. Earlier in the year, we were anticipating that maybe by the end of the year, we'd see rates like get into that kind of 5% range. Well, now we're into the middle of the year. I would say that like the crystal ball was a little off on that. So it's not looking like that's going to happen. So I think we're kind of in this, right? I do agree with the sentiment that I think, buyers are adjusting to, 6-7% interest rates. I think it's looking like we're likely going to stay in that range. But yeah, that's the best that the crystal ball can offer.
Yeah, and look, I'm in deep, and that's what I see. Look, you got to grind. A lot of these points you've talked about, you got to grind or get left behind. You got to do the basics and connect, and you can't control the interest rates and anything else. And right now, it's the clients that are transacting are the ones that really have to, and everyone else will be a periphery long-term client to stay connected to. But we came from a market where for 10 years people were just buying and selling for not necessarily for fun, but it wasn't because they had to.
Right.
And now people are like, unless you have to, unless you have a fundamental reason, those are the people we need to focus on. And that's the time we need to spend. Those are the clients that are going to transact, and everybody else are relationship builders and connecting. And because that could be a year from now, 5 years, 10 years from now. And that's all getting back to basics. So I love all that feedback. All right, so let's get into some personal stuff. What are some of your are you a runner? Are you a runner?
I'm a runner, yes.
What are some other, so you're like marathons, 10Ks?
Yeah, so marathon, so endurance athlete.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Talk about grind. That is tough.
That is a grind. That is a grind. So I grew up as a competitive gymnast. So have always been like an athlete. So now as an adult, like my hobby is endurance sports, triathlon. I'm an Ironman. I like to say I'm a retired Ironman.
You've done Ironman.
Because retired because that's a lot. But I do long distance running. So right now I'm training for the Marine Corps Marathon. That will happen in Washington, D.C. a little bit later this year. It's a marquee race in the country. It'll be my first time doing that particular marathon. I've done New York City Marathon, of course, LA Marathon. I've done a couple times, San Diego Marathon. So yeah, I've done a few of them. Yeah, I've done many triathlons. I've done the full distance Ironman triathlon, which is 140.6 miles, swimming, biking, and running. That one, you do a 2.4 mile swim. Then you get on a bike for 112 miles, and then you do a marathon.
Love it. So easy. Yeah.
Yeah. So my friends, including my husband, who's also an Ironman and actively training for some races now, will tease when you only do a marathon, like you're really not like showing up, like, because unless you do the swim and the bike, like you're taking the easy way.
You're dogging it. You're mailing it in. All right. How about while you're training, what music would you be listening to fire you up for that triathlon? What's on your playlist?
Yeah, I normally listen to podcasts and audiobooks.
Okay.
Occasionally I'll like, have a playlist that I will jam out to if I need some extra, motivation on a long run. But it really is like running is my recharge time. It's time to get some of the right thoughts in your ears from, some great people. So yeah, it's podcasts and audiobooks, and I often will stop, pause my Garmin, and like write notes down on either like work ideas or problem solving.
Type A. Type A, Wendy.
Like, hey, yeah.
You never stop working and never stop grinding. All right.
I
Well,
mean,
what would
such a great time to think, right? Like it's you're thinking, and yeah, that is definitely my inspiration time.
yeah, I think exercise and working out or whatever it is, walking, running, you really get clear headed. And yes, for me too, I do some of my most effective and productive thinking. What would be some good podcasts? Of course, The Deal with Danny Brown you'd recommend. But what are some good business podcasts, or doesn't have to be business podcasts, just things that you would suggest, hey, this would be a good listen for, people that are in real estate or agents and or audiobooks too.
Yeah, so real estate specific, like one of my favorite real estate podcasts is Brian Buffini.
Okay, good coach. Yeah.
Love Brian Buffini. Love his podcast. He doesn't always focus on real estate, but I mean he's so well known to us in the real
Yes.
estate community. He has some great guests on that on his podcast. It's a Great Life is the name of the podcast. So that's a favorite one that I really enjoy. I listen to some, marketing podcasts. I like to listen kind of like outside of, the industry as well.
Yeah.
Pop in and out of, Tony Robbins, Jay Shetty.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Mindset, coaching, and
Yeah,
fundamental ways to think about and apply to any business. Like
that's right.
I
Yeah,
love Brian Buffini. I haven't listened to this podcast in a while. I love his accent. Is he Irish? He's got the Irish accent.
Irish. Yes. Yeah.
Got a great accent. I love it. That's a good note for me. And let me ask you any other words of advice for agents out there in this market. You've shared a lot already about leaning in, communicating, or any other specifics or things you would say, hey, this is what you should think about for the next 6 months to 12 months if you're an agent.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to stick with the cliches. We've mentioned a few, but they're cliches because they work, right? And they're true. But I would say that it is. So when I spend about a third of my time like in market talking with our agents. And when I'm talking with agents one-on-one, one of the questions I always ask is, who are you surrounding yourself with? Because if they're talking to me about their business, what's going on in the business, it's down, it's up, it's challenging, marketing this, social media that, I want to know who you're surrounding yourself with. And I think that is one of the most important actions that you can control. We can't control interest rates, we can't control the market, but we can control the people around us. And there's that cliche saying that, you rise to like the 5 people you spend the most time with.
You're the average of the people, those 5 people.
Right. Like if you want to raise your business to the next level, you better get with people that are on that next level, which means you better get into your office. You better have an office to go into, right? Like that would be helpful. And then you should make sure that you are proactively reaching out and building your network that you want to spend time with and that are going to help you meet those goals that you have.
You are dropping knowledge on us. It's so simple, but it's so hard to execute. And you've given us so many gems and so many things to think about. So you rock. You're such an impressive person, and I'm so glad I was able to lock you down for an hour.
Oh, well, my pleasure.
I'm going to say I'm going to get you on a surfboard. That's my goal. I'm getting you on a surfboard either in San Diego or Newport. You're going out there, Nova Scotia to surfer. Surfer girl.
Yeah, well, luckily I can swim, so I don't know how long I'll stay on the board, but I can swim.
Hey, as
So
long as
we'll
you can swim,
for it.
and we can give you the life raft, even we can do whatever, but you'll be fine. Anyways, thank you so much. I loved having you. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was awesome.